today's video. In today's video, I'll be discussing why the 2022 Florida governor race will not be competitive. It really won't matter, honestly, if RDS RDS is still going to win by a fairly strong margin, or at least that's what I'll be discussing in this video. Sorry if there's a loud noise. A deflated soccer ball just hit the ground. Also, by the time this comes out, I think it'll be like 12:30 or 12:45 on August 30th. So yeah, on the 29th, the day that it's for, you could say. But so just looking at this, there's been some. It's been widely regarded as a relatively, no, I don't want to say safe, but a relatively, because it hasn't necessarily, or at least by a lot of people, been considered to be a safe R seat, but it's been, or at least in terms of the characterization, it's been a seat though that was expected to go to or it's been a seat that Ron DeSantis was expected to win and expected to win, by a fairly large margin at that. I've probably, I'm not certain what I predicted at last, but as of recently, I would probably say R plus 7 at the worst for him. R plus 13 at the best. But recently, his approval rating has not been the best. I mean, it's kind of hard to find, but I've seen people discussing it. And there's this Politico, article, and you can go read it. I might link it in the comments or something. But it's essentially just discussing how his approval rating is dropping. He was very, very popular in Florida. As you can see, it's getting lower into the 40s-ish. Which is kind of interesting. I met Biden 40% approval in Florida, 53% approval of his job performance. So that's kind of interesting. But some things that have more or less favored the Democratic Party throughout this were two recent polls, and I'll be discussing that. But also just a quick little look at the Democratic primary. Nikki Fried seems to now have recently taken the lead. Which, I mean, you could argue that it's good for the Democratic Party, not good. I think that Charlie Crist has more appeal. Generally speaking, I think he has much more appeal in the suburbs. I think he's going to do very, very well in the suburbs to get the nomination. I think he's going to do much better with older white voters. I think he also has fairly average, solid solid appeal to Hispanic and Latino voters, which is definitely going to help him. Especially in the suburbs where I think RDS will struggle. But regardless, looking down at these polls, the first one is an RDS versus Charlie Crist poll that was taken fairly recently that had Charlie Crist winning by 14%. And this is obviously a ridiculously large margin of victory. I mean, that is 14% margin of victory against a, you could argue, popular incumbent in Florida, in what could be described as a red wave, as a Democrat, is just, it's ridiculous, honestly. That would be an insane margin of victory, but it's probably not going to happen realistically, and I'll explain why. But a very similar poll, I think they're probably part of the same polling thing. That makes sense. But I mean, looking at this has Nikki Fried winning by 8 and Charlie Crist winning by 14%. But looking at the vast majority of other polls, looking at RCP's polling as well, it's still very DeSantis heavy. I mean, these are DeSantis plus 5, DeSantis plus 10, DeSantis plus 9, DeSantis plus 3, DeSantis plus what? 21, DeSantis, or 22, I can do math. DeSantis plus 12, DeSantis plus 6. This one's a tie, but it's from early March. Now I'm just going down through things. And then over here versus Chris, DeSantis plus 4, DeSantis plus 3, DeSantis plus 8, Chris plus 1. Other than that, DeSantis wins all of them. These are, and I mean, like, in some of them, yes, Charlie Crist could win, but that would, like, for example, right here, for him to even tie it, that would be assuming that roughly 2/3 of the undecided voter split for him. Over here, fairly similar margin. Over here, he even if he carries every undecided voter, according to this poll, it's still over for Chris. These are outliers, and I think the fact that I could see arguments both ways for this, but the fact that it was ridiculously large margins of victory, I think, can also play into this, showing that it's not necessarily the most reliable or the most realistic scenario from the polling. I mean, like, if it had been like Chris plus 3 or something, I would be a lot less skeptical. But if it's an outlier and it's such a significant, it's such like an over, that's almost a safe margin for Chris. That's such a large margin of victory for a Democrat, and then almost everything else being a victory for a Republican. That is just, it's really hard to see any of this actually being reliable. If it's very, very consistent, and all of a sudden there's one poll that throws it off, and it's just completely like one, not even just like an outlier. Like, it's so clear that it's an outlier, and it's a very similar thing against Nikki Fried. They're just so clearly not consistent with anything that we've been seeing, even with RDS's approval. It's really, it's very unrealistic. And looking at RCP, even RCP still has the DeSantis margin of victory despite these polls. And not necessarily that RCP wouldn't, but like still, it's DeSantis plus 1, DeSantis plus 6.5. Like these are, it's clearly not something that we should take seriously. I don't think that Florida is even, I think that Lean R might be a bit, I think that putting Lean R is still being a bit favorable to Christ or Fried, much less giving them a victory and then a likely margin, almost a safe margin for Chris. It's clearly not something that we should be looking at or trusting. These polls are clearly just absurd, and don't expect Florida to be relatively competitive in 2022, or at least in the governor elections. So yeah, thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like below. Stay tuned for my next video. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Please comment your suggestions down below. I hope to see you all in my next video. Bye.